Mr. Chairman, I'm Garrett Graves with the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority of Louisiana, which was the statewide entity that was established to oversee flood control, coastal restoration, and hurricane protection for South Louisiana. I want to talk about four things. I want to talk a little bit about the coastal crisis. I wanted to talk about post-Katrina and some of the reforms that have been discussed here. I want to talk a little bit about government structure and standing, and lastly, would like to discuss a little bit about the contract that it was executed to pursue this lawsuit. The slides that were shown earlier in regard to Mr. Slfpa-W's presentation, I would sit down with Mr. Slfpa-W anywhere and give that presentation. It was a good portrayal about what is going on in coastal Louisiana. The resources in South Louisiana have been mismanaged for about 80 years, and no one can argue with that. And historic activities dating back, as you noted, Mr. Jones, excuse me, Representative Jones, decades and decades and decades did contribute to it. I can't allege otherwise, and I would have no credibility sitting here and saying anything differently. We have lost 1,900 square miles, and I want to make note that there are many other things that did contribute. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. We have lost 1,900 square miles of our coast, which is the size of Rhode Island. And a lot of times we say that the state of Arkansas doesn't have to worry about hurricanes because they have Louisiana as their buffer. And so they don't have to worry about that storm surge. Our buffer, which was the state of Rhode Island, is now gone, and we do have to worry about hurricanes. We are vulnerable, and we do have a coastal crisis. Everybody in this room, and I'd be very shocked to learn that there's anybody in here that would say that we don't have a coastal crisis and we shouldn't be doing something about restoring and protecting South Louisiana and the communities that live there, the communities that are established there. 2 million people. In this case, in regard to this lawsuit, I've been shocked to see some of the groups that have come out of the woodwork. I've been working on this for almost 20 years. We've never even heard or seen some of the groups that suddenly jump out in support of this lawsuit and suddenly found the coast as an important banner. Some other groups that have taken positions entirely contrary to what they've done in the past, which also, as I note, is very interesting. There's no question about the relationship between land loss and vulnerability. Hurricane Katrina exposed it, Rita exposed it, Gustav exposed it, Ike exposed it, and absolutely Hurricane Isaac, a Category 1 storm. The devastated areas, for example, in Representative Leopold's district, and in some areas of Representative Gisclair's area, from a Category 1 storm, experienced some of the worst flooding that they've ever seen. These communities that have been here for 300 years. So there's a relationship there. Coming after Hurricane Katrina, a number of reforms were put in place. And one of the most important ones was recognizing that there were disparate efforts attacking the coastal crisis that we experienced. And that had to do with the numerous levee districts, it had to do with certain parish authorities, and it had to do, quite frankly, with probably 5 different state agencies that had some stake or some authority in regard to coastal restoration, hurricane protection, and flood control. So there were disparate efforts, and Representative Jones, you noted, and you here, as well as a number of other folks, to ensure that we had a more cohesive approach. And so, yes, and when these flood authorities were established, they were intended to isolate them from the politics. And many of you know the history of, for example, the Orleans Levee District that owned an airport, that owned a bridge, that owns marinas. And those, by the way, were all acquired with millage that was charged for flood protection purposes. And so those are public funds that are sequestered in these assets that still sit there today, by the way, millions and millions of dollars. And so reforms did need to take place. And the flood authorities were put in place, thank you. The flood authorities were put in place to ensure that we had continuity, that we had consistency. But Representative Jones noted something else, and that's that the CPRA was established because it's not just about levee districts. It's that we've got to have an overarching entity that's looking at the adjacent hydrologic basins. For example, if you come in and you build great flood protection in one area, what potentially happens is you channel that wave energy to the adjacent area. So if you have a 500-year level protection in New Orleans and you don't adopt the right types of transitions, you could cause additional flooding or inundation in Jefferson Parish, in St. Charles Parish, and some of the adjacent areas. So you have to take a holistic look. That's one of the painful lessons learned from Hurricane Katrina. And so the CPRA was established. And I want to make note that we've made reforms to the CPRA over the last 5 years. You have. You have ensured that additional levy districts and regional representatives be on there. So it's not just state folks. You have regions of the state that are all represented, in South Louisiana that are all represented there. The state law that created the CPRA says that the CPRA has oversight over these activities. It has oversight over these levy districts and flood authorities in this case. And I also want to make note that today we have approximately 24 levy districts in the state that DOTD and the CPRA exercise oversight over. DOTD for those north of the Old River Control Structure in the vicinity of Simmsport, and the CPRA for those entities that are south. As I noted earlier, the historic energy production and activities that date back into the early 1900s, they contributed to land loss. Whether it's the pipeline canals, the access canals, the extraction, they contributed. But when you look back historically, the state of Louisiana was actually growing, or we were accreting. We had a growing delta up until the 1920s. Our state was getting larger. And we'd like to remind folks that had that continued unimpeded, the state of Louisiana would be better than Texas instead of just better. And so, what happened is in 1927, we had the worst riverine flood in our nation's history. And so Congress came in, which at that time was amazing speed, in 1928, and they authorized the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project. In my opinion, one of the most successful civil works projects from two perspectives. One is we haven't had additional riverine flooding. And you'll remember the high water we had in 2011. That was record high water on the Mississippi and Atchafalaya systems, and we didn't flood. We also have 5 of the top 15 ports in the nation today, and it's because, to a large degree, the river stays in between those levees and no longer meanders. It used to change course every approximately 1,200 years, in some cases much less. And so it's been successful. It has been one of the nation's largest environmental disasters from a third perspective, and that is what it has done to the wetlands. Every spring, when you had the spring floods, the river used to overflow the banks, and it would deposit sediment into those adjacent areas. And again, our state was growing 3/4 of a square mile a year. The levees were put on, we immediately began a reversal. And in some years, including in 2005, we have lost up to 200 square miles in 1 year. 200 square miles. Dating back from the 1930s, we have an average in certain decades that range anywhere from about 16 square miles of land loss to in excess of 30 square miles of land loss. There is a coastal crisis. It is attributable largely to how the Corps of Engineers put those levees in place. If you or I were to have done that exact same project, we would have had to mitigate, not just for the wetlands loss we caused then, but for the ongoing wetlands loss. The $2 billion figure that Mr. Bowery referred to earlier, that is a figure that we calculated. That is how much it would cost the Corps of Engineers to mitigate for their existing management of the Mississippi River system, the freshwater and the sediment. How they sequestered or trained it in between the levees as opposed to letting it get out, where it can cause land growth and where it can push the saltwater intrusion out, which contributes to our land loss. $2 billion a year is the figure. Extraordinary numbers. You also have other things, such as sea level rise, subsidence, nutria, the oil spill, and as I noted a few minutes ago, hurricanes, and there are other minor issues that all contribute to land loss in Louisiana. In the last 5 years, this body has provided more funds for us to build hurricane protection and coastal restoration and flood control projects than in any other 30-year period, at least in our state's history. Adjusted for inflation, do whatever you want. You guys have provided more funds for this than any other period in our state's history. As a matter of fact, if you take the remanagement or the reorganization of the state's coastal program that you guys did starting in 2006, as I recall, and then the reforms in 08, 09, and 10, we are now using approximately 30 to 40 different funding sources to carry out coastal sustainability efforts in our state. And in the last approximately 6 years, we have been able to cobble together approximately $18 billion. So for folks to sit here and say that nothing is happening is absolutely untrue and ill-informed. We have done more in the last 5 years than ever Is there more to be done? Absolutely. The master plan's $50 billion over 50 years. Well, we were able to pull together 150 people from within state government and establish this new organization and partner with the Corps of Engineers and all the repairs of the hurricane protection system in New Orleans in an extraordinarily short amount of time. And as a matter of fact, today, the greater New Orleans area has the best hurricane protection system that has ever been in that area. And it is rated at a 100-year level of protection, which is based upon the conditions.
Who is that again? Say that again. Who has the best they've ever had?
The greater New Orleans area, which includes Orleans, Jefferson, St. Charles, St. Bernard, Plaquemines, to be clear, portions of St. Charles, and there's a lower portion of Plaquemines, lower portion of Jefferson that are excluded. And those areas, the greater New Orleans areas, has the best protection system that it has ever had. And I want to note, it's a 100-year level of protection that is based upon current conditions, meaning with the land loss that's occurred, recognizing that relationship between increased vulnerability. Now, Mr. Barry and Mr. Slfpa all noted a few minutes ago that he compared it to other countries and the standards of other countries, and he's exactly right. In the Netherlands, they have areas that have a 10,000-year level of protection. However, there's an important distinction. They don't have hurricanes. If we didn't have hurricanes, our levees would be tens of feet, in some cases, lower than they are today. So it's an important distinction that must be noted. The master plan does call for a 500-year level of protection for the greater New Orleans area with appropriate transitions to prevent induced flooding in adjacent areas. In the last 10 years, this issue, thanks to the efforts of Governor Foster, Governor Blanco, and I think continued with Governor Jindal and the legislature, this issue has raised its profile to a level it's never been seen before. We have national groups that are touting the progress that's being made, touting the crisis that we have in South Louisiana. And so this is very much getting more attention. In Congress, in the last approximately 10 years, we've passed legislation that authorizes in excess of $10 billion in projects, in excess of $20 billion in projects for South Louisiana. For hurricane protection, flood control, and coastal restoration. In 2005, we passed the Coastal Impact Assistance Program, where dollars associated with offshore energy production were given to the state of Louisiana and the 5 other offshore producing states, to where we got just under $500 million, including funds provided to the parishes for restoration and protection. In December 2006, the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act was passed that began laying the groundwork for sharing offshore energy revenues, to where the state gets 37.5% of revenues from offshore energy production, beginning from offshore energy production from new leases after that December 2006 enactment. And importantly, you guys unanimously approved the state's coastal master plan, the update from the 2007 plan, that provides that comprehensive vision that integrates restoration, protection. It integrates the fact that you need industries and economic activity in coastal Louisiana. It integrates the fact that you need this productive ecosystem, and it integrates the fact that you have unique cultures in South Louisiana that need to be protected and sustained. So I want to make note again, the master plan considers the fact that you can have the most productive environment in the world, you can have the greatest levees in the world, but if you don't have the associated economic activities and employment opportunities, who's going to live there? There's a relationship. I also want to note the fact that while it passed unanimously through, the master plan passed unanimously through the House and Senate, it did have broad-based support from energy industry, from environmental groups, and from numerous federal agencies, including a few cabinet officials of the Obama administration that sent us very nice letters. This lawsuit fundamentally conflicts with the state's constitution and with the state's statutory structure. This is a flood authority. This decision has profound consequences, and I want to separate that statement from the fact that the suit may or may not have merit. We've discussed the issue. We have a coastal crisis, and there were implications caused by historic energy production, which also making note. The state has fully reformed its practices to ensure, and for many years now, that adverse consequences do not occur. It conflicts with it because there's a much bigger picture here. We don't just have this one flood authority. We have nearly 24 levee districts in the state. We have 20 parishes in coastal Louisiana. We have over 2 million people that live in South Louisiana that are affected by this in various ways. And so a more holistic approach needs to be taken here. The Constitution establishes a governor, it establishes an attorney general. We also have statutory structure for agencies such as Department of Natural Resources and offices like the CPRA and DOTD. You have all the levee districts in the state that on Friday met and unanimously opposed this litigation because they understand the bigger picture. So I'll say that again. The other levee districts in the state all participated in the meeting on Friday and opposed the lawsuit and recognized that policy issues such as this are the job of the CPRA in association with consultation with OG, DNR, and others. And I think one of the reasons that they did that is because there's recognition that there's a bigger picture, and that bigger picture includes the fact that the energy industry in Louisiana provides 300,000 jobs. That the energy industry in Louisiana includes over $80 billion in annual economic activity. That the energy industry in Louisiana provides in excess of, well, say between $2.5 and $3 billion for the state treasury. Now, I want to be clear, and I'm not saying that anyone deserves a pass because of the economic activity and the jobs. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are ways of approaching things like this, and there is a bigger picture, pivoting to the Corps of Engineers. Let's say that these guys are wildly successful and that their projections of nearly $10 billion are realized. If I allow the Corps of Engineers to continue what they're doing right now, that buys us 5 years, because I noted that the Corps' damages or losses cost about $2 billion a year. That buys us 5 years. Then what? That buys us 5 years of net neutral, of not losing anything. It's not $1, it's not $2 billion getting us ahead or $10 billion getting us ahead. It's neutral, 5 years. The fundamental challenge we have is the Corps of Engineers right now and their management of the Mississippi River system. And we have been discussing now in excess of a year of strategies to address that. And I expect that we will be rolling out a number of strategies. In fact, people in this room, including some associated with the lawsuit, are well aware of that. You may have heard that we're in multi-billion-dollar litigation with BP right now. I'd love for somebody to go ask BP if Louisiana takes it easy on oil and gas companies. They're holding them accountable.
Let me ask you a question. If BP, in the suit you have, and the damage may be two different types, so it may not apply, but I want to get this straight in my head. If you're trying, if we have litigation with BP for damage to the coast, and somebody else has filed a suit saying it was already damaged, it already wasn't worth a flip, what does that do to my lawsuit?
I think that
I asked the question only to reiterate what you're saying to us. It has to be a coordinated effort. You can't just be running around out there hiring lawyers and filing lawsuits. That's been my experience with government. It doesn't work that way.
And Senator Smith noted earlier, you're talking about $10 billion. Did you pick up the phone and call them? An industry that has 300,000 jobs and all that economic activity. Maybe you get to this conclusion at some point, but do you pick up the phone and call first when you're talking about something?
It would surprise you to know that in the Lake Charles area, and now I know south of Baton Rouge, two plants going in that will be making some changes, clearly, in what our environment looks like. Between the two of them, going to create several thousand jobs, the conversion of natural gas to jet fuel and diesel. Those several thousand jobs that we expect our people to get, if they're subject to the lawsuit, what makes you think they're going to come here?
It's part of the bigger picture, Mr. Chairman. And as a matter of fact, right now, another issue that I think is unbeknownst to the attorney that is working on this lawsuit is that several $1 million per year in land rights are given to us by these energy companies. And in many cases, it's projects that actually affect this flood authority. Right now, we're spending money restoring the New Orleans land bridge Representative Badon was referring to earlier. We're spending money doing that, using the twin span aggregate, crushing it and restoring that. We're paying for that. Right now, we are trying to move forward on Biloxi Marsh restoration, a project where, once again, energy companies own the property. You imagine, and I want to make note, 99.9% of the time when we go to an energy company, 92% of coastal Louisiana is in private hands. The majority of that is owned by the oil and gas companies. When we go to them and say, hey, we have this project for a levee, for restoration, they donate the land rights to us, in many cases contribute funds and in-kind services. So that relationship has just frozen. And projects that were actually underway now are going to be impeded because of this lawsuit, because of lack of consultation. Representative Gisclair noted earlier, what does this do for Barrier Islands? Nothing. Barrier Islands were affected more so by the control of the Mississippi River than anything else. There's a natural westward sediment migration pattern, and that has been obstructed. The sediment is now going off the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Although we do have hundreds of millions of dollars of construction in Barrier Island restoration underway right now, as you well know. You also have the issue of how the river used to change course, and so, for example, as noted earlier, the chandeliers are eroding rapidly, and it's because the Mississippi River used to take more of a Breton-type course before the levees were put in place. But what's happening here is this is a decision that was made in a vacuum. And again, in that vacuum, perhaps that decision made a lot of sense, but there's a bigger picture. And the bigger picture was very much disrupted or obstructed by this suit. I think that an analogy here is having the mayor of Grand Isle, who's a phenomenal guy and a heck of a fighter, deciding that he's going to declare war against Canada on behalf of the United States. It's an inappropriate structure of government. It's an inappropriate approach, and he'd probably win, Representative Gisclair. He would, but it's inappropriate. I listened earlier and heard the folks talk about how the Flood Authority is made up of experts. It's made up of technical experts. It's not made up of policymakers. You guys are the policymakers. The governor's the policymaker. The AG, in some cases, is the policymaker. This is a large policy decision that absolutely conflicted with and offended our Constitution and our statutes. There are remedies, and folks are going to say, well, what's your plan? There are remedies. And there is a comprehensive strategy to address all these things. I'm sorry, I just remembered one of the other things we're working on right now, Mr. Chairman, or chairs, is we're appealing a $570 million case with FEMA. They've agreed to restore the beaches and barrier islands in the state of Mississippi and Alabama as a result of some of our recent hurricanes, Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and Ike. And they've refused to restore our barrier islands. $570 million, Mr. Chairman, that we're appealing on right now. There are numerous things that are going on right now that are being run or coordinated through the CPRA with levee districts and parishes. In regard to a remedy specifically for the oil and gas issues, you may be surprised to learn that offshore energy in the Gulf of Mexico has produced somewhere approaching $200 billion for the United States Treasury. $200 billion. And just within recent years, we've had an average, I'm going to guess, somewhere around $6 billion a year coming from offshore Louisiana alone. In some years, Louisiana's had 88% of offshore energy production. Okay? We received a check this year on that estimated $6 billion in energy revenues for the federal government. We received a check this year for $80,000. $80,000. Now, if this production were occurring onshore on federal lands, that check on $6 billion in production would have been $3 billion. Not $80,000, $3 billion. An additional 40%, for a total of 90%, an additional 40% would have gone into what's known as the Reclamation Fund to spend on water projects in those same states. So in effect, 90% of the money is coming back to those states that produce energy on federal lands, and in the case of federal waters, they received $80,000 on $6 billion in production. In addition, another disparity that exists is the fact that the state of Louisiana has 3 miles of state waters. The state of Florida and the state of Texas have 3 marine leagues, which is in excess of 9 miles. So there's another disparity, onshore production versus offshore, and Texas and Florida as compared to Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. Those are issues we're trying to address. In regard to revenue sharing from offshore energy, the state and numerous governors, including Governor Jindal, has absolutely advocated for this. Governor Jindal passed very generous legislation through the House of Representatives in 2005, as I recall, that would have shared significant portions of money with the state of Louisiana. In 2003, then Congressman Tozant passed legislation that would have provided our state probably close to $20 billion from offshore energy production. And those bills did not get through the Senate. But what we're working on right now, and in fact within recent weeks, both the House, U.S. House and the Senate have passed amendments to improve our offshore energy revenue sharing. One of the talking points that we use, one of the main ones we use, is that in Louisiana, we're the ones who perfected the energy technology. We suffered these impacts decades ago when we were first figuring out how to do this and first tapping these energy resources. So you need to give us a disproportionate share because of that. Under some legislation that was proposed, the state of Virginia would have received nearly $1 billion for the first $3 billion they produced for the federal government. The 4 Gulf states that produce energy collectively would have had to have produced approximately $220 billion before receiving collectively, those 4 states, $1 billion. We're trying to address this disparity. We're trying to ensure that we're trying to address the energy impacts through this approach. Our congressional delegation is on board, and this lawsuit offends that strategy and those efforts ongoing in Congress right now. I've already noted BP and how that is another part of this global strategy, and certainly we're not letting them off the hook. And I want to pivot to the contract right now. I heard it said earlier that I never objected to the lawsuit, and I just want to make note very clearly for the record that that is complete fiction. Chairs. I did participate, and I previously believed that executive sessions were confidential, but perhaps they're not now. I did participate in an executive session meeting, and I heard December, and I know it was in that time frame. I don't remember the exact month. I participated in one executive session meeting after a phone call from the president of the board telling me about what was going on. Mr. Chairman, I sat in one of the strangest rooms I've been in, and that they had an attorney that had not been hired, that was sitting in the room listening to this entire discussion about whether an attorney should be hired or not, and a vote was taken on whether or not to hire the attorney with him in the room.
They went into a room.
That is true.
It's absolutely not true.
Sir.
That's me.
Hold on. In this room, I'm the judge. You just need to relax. If you want to speak, I'll be more than glad to recognize you. But y'all can't be arguing back and forth. And frankly, you're too big for him to handle. I can see that. So just sit down and relax. Don't go screaming and hollering. Did they sit in a room with an attorney that they had not hired and come out and hire the attorney?
They held a vote after the meeting. It was decided that they were going to put this on hold.
Did the attorney have any input in that?
Absolutely, because I'm sorry.
Did the attorney have input in the private meeting? Did the attorney speak?
He did speak, and as I brought up numerous points, such as many of those that I listed here, he came back and refuted many of those. But I guess if I was potentially going to get checked for $1 billion, I would have done the same thing.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. And I just want to reiterate that point. In fact, Mr. Chair, I'll offer up my entire life savings, which isn't a whole lot, if anybody can prove that that was not the case. Absolutely, a vote was taken. It was later determined that in that meeting that again they were going to put this effort on hold. And as a matter of fact, I had a discussion about that exact thing with the president of the levee district just a few weeks ago, where it was once again affirmed. So the fact that this contract was executed, and there was no discussion with the energy industry. There was no discussion with the Attorney General's office taking over this. The fact that it gives this attorney 1/4 to 1/3 of potential recoveries, which importantly, when you read the contract, it actually says that it's 1/3 or 1/4 of the value of the restoration projects included. So let's say that they do get $10 billion. So that means $10 billion in restoration projects. The board has to come up with $2 to $3 billion in cash to pay the attorney, because he gets the percentage on the value of the restoration projects. So
Neither of that was disclosed in the resolution to the Attorney General's office.
The so-called poison pill provision is fairly amazing. In fact, Mr. Chair, under the poison pill provision, it in effect gives a private attorney that's unelected, unappointed, unconfirmed, a private attorney within the state of Louisiana, control over public funds without any approval or regulation by the board. The poison pill provision requires that the board, it makes the board responsible for all of his expenses and fees.
Well, that's correct. Now, just make this clear. It's the contingency fee they get, plus additional money they get on future value that they've not yet collected that they're going to have to pay, plus all of the expenses of the suit.
That's correct. And so if this suit is ultimately dismissed, which as you guys have noted, there are 4 openings on the board right now. There potential for legislation next year.
Let me just make it very clear. It doesn't make any difference who you put on the board, right? What they have done with this provision is tie the hands of any board to require them to proceed or pay.
Yes, sir. And so the attorney is the one who he can spend, he can generate fees, incur expenses on anything he deems appropriate without the board's approval. And under the poison pill provision, the board's fees or funds that are generated from millage for hurricane protection will be the revenue stream to pay for it. And so this attorney could incur tens of millions of dollars in fees and expenses without there's no scope of work necessarily. There's no cap on the funding. I haven't seen a rate sheet. These expenses could all be incurred, and under the poison pill provision, no one on the board has a say-so over what the cap is and how much they can spend, yet they would be liable for those costs.
It is difficult, as we sit here, to hear the testimony that the job is to protect the public and save lives, and enter into agreements such as this to enrich a few and take money away from what would have been protection. I'm going to tell you, that's hard to swallow.
This whole thing is fascinating, and I think there was just this wasn't very well thought out, and I think there was a lack of strategy. And I want to say that I think there was as you saw here, I think that there was good intentions in some cases, but I don't think this was well thought out. And I think the legal counsel in this case was again, if I were potentially getting $1 billion, I would.
Let me say this if I can. We have been here for a while.
I just have a few more minutes.
I only had one other card that wanted to speak in opposition. Giuseppe, is that correct? You have to pronounce your last name for me with the Levee Board Association. Allow you time to do that. And then I have several cards now that have been turned in that would like to speak in support, and we will hear those. Right. If you have any concluding remarks.
Yes, sir. I'm just saying, in regard to the contract, Mr. Chair, this potentially sets up a scenario where you would have a board that is in place deciding how billions of dollars are spent without legislative input, without input from the governor or others. Importantly, the suit only includes this one area. And as I noted earlier, if you restore this one area, the water has to go somewhere. Where does it go? Representative Gisclair, it goes to your area. Representative Leopold, it goes to your area. You cannot come in and take these stovepipe approaches. This is what led to portions of the disaster we saw from Katrina. You've got to take a comprehensive approach. The other levee districts have rejected this effort and understand how it's not well thought out and it conflicts with the bigger picture. The suit repeatedly alleges that the board alone, this board alone, is responsible for the construction of levees and all sorts of other things that the CPRA is paying for. But we're the ones
the board said to us in testimony that they don't, at this point, know what they're going to do because they don't have science until the court case establishes the science. Is that what? Did you hear the same thing?
I did. And Mr. Chairman, the state, the CPRA, signed the agreement for the $1.8 billion cost share associated with the hurricane protection system, and we're the ones who are paying for that, including paying for engineering services within the board to ensure that the core work is being done appropriately. Lastly, Mr. Chair, this suit potentially prescribes remedies on private property. The board doesn't own this property. Maybe folks want it canals filled, maybe they don't. I think that the property owners are important stakeholders in this case. But in conclusion, you look forward at this, and you can map out all the scenarios for how this moves forward. I think of virtually any of them. this lawsuit eventually goes away and you migrate back to the bigger picture strategy that the CPRA has been employing now for years, and I'll note, I think, fairly successfully. And so that poison pill provision is very important. I'm most offended by this whole thing because of the fact that we have spent years and years pulling folks together. We have the environmental community and the energy industry on the same page on a comprehensive plan. We have Republicans, Democrats, we have all races, we have all socioeconomic classes. This is not a partisan issue. And we've been able to make progress without litigation. We've been able to move forward in a cohesive manner with parishes, with levy districts, with state agencies, with the federal agencies to a large degree, without this type of conflict. And that has been very hard work for us to achieve. And this lawsuit absolutely throws a monkey wrench in all of the progress that we've been able to make in that collective approach moving forward. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Announce your last name for me, will you?
Yes, sir. Giuseppe Miserandino.
You couldn't do it either.
No, sir. I'm glad to see everyone still has a sense of humor.
Go ahead. I see the diet has worked for you. We're glad to have you back in the committee.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I first want to thank y'all for allowing us an opportunity to come in front of y'all to give our viewpoints. I think the most important thing in part of my presentation is what Senator Adley said in the red card. It's a red card. It's not a green card.
It's red.
And representing an association of levy boards. I am the regional director of the Flood Authority West. I've heard on numerous occasions this morning that the authority, as Representative St. Germain will remember, it wasn't one authority that was created, it was two authorities created. One on the east side, one on the west side. So that was one of the major issues that was done, and I'm very grateful that it did occur because we had two different polders, two different water basins, and what would be associated with this lawsuit. Our official position here right now is for ALBL. I've been doing this business since I was a very small toddler. I'm still very young.
Representative Jones has a question for you.
I just want a clarification. You're the executive director of the Flood Basin West. What?
Yes, sir.
Clarify what that is.
Yes, sir. During the special session, the push was to have one voice, one authority that represented the whole metropolitan area. Through the great efforts of our West Bank delegation and the senators and representatives, that was able in 2 o'clock in the morning to go from one levy authority to two. Even questions were asked if they're going to put Roman numeral 2 on the button instead of one Roman.
So you're the other. You're the west. They're the east.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
which, by the way, we oppose, but we always thought it should have been one.
Yeah.
And then one became two, and
That's correct.
but anyway, I wanted to clarify. So you're from where do you? What's your address? Where do you live?
I live at 118 Sienna Drive, Gretna, Louisiana.
You're in Gretna. Okay.
Our jurisdictional boundaries covers 3.7 miles of St. Charles Parish, the entire Jefferson Parish, the Upper Jefferson of the West Bank, and approximately 12 miles of Plaquemines Parish.
Do you have any overlap with Southeast?
No, we used to. That's a good point. There was Algiers portion of the West Bank that was inside of Orleans Levy District that was ripped out and given to our authority. If you read the lawsuit states that Slfpa-East, not West, Slfpa-East was representing over 4 million people in the metropolitan New Orleans area. What happened to this little old West Authority on the other side that represents Port of Orleans Parish, Port of Jefferson, Port of St. Charles, and Port of Plaquemines?
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. I just want to understand where you're from. You can go back to your...
Yes, sir. So as representing the ALBL, in 22 years, I've never seen ABL be split the way it is. Even during the major crisis of after Katrina, we stuck together. Now, it was monumental on Friday that we passed a joint motion unanimously with one abstention from Slfpa East to oppose this lawsuit. Because we are afraid, not even for the merit of the lawsuit, we let Garrett and them deal with the merit of the lawsuit, but we're afraid that all the great work these levy districts have done is not going to be acknowledged, not going to be seen. And I guess the bigger thing from Slfpa West point of view is we never had a flood protection. You know, the east side of the river had a flood protection to fail. We never had a flood protection at all to fail. So if that storm would have came to the west, it would have been worse than what happened in New Orleans. And for CPRA to stand up and be toe-to-toe, shoulder-to-shoulder with us and provide us the funding, the leadership, it's phenomenal. That's what cooperation provides us. I was told one time, they asked, well, how are you flood fighting the Harvey Canal prior to CPRA and the Corps building the system? I said, with a shoestring and a prayer, and most of the time we were on our knees praying. And now we have one of the most robust systems that our authority has built. It's not represented by the East Authority. There is another West Authority. And there's 23 other levy districts that are affected. And it'll make you really become passionate what you're doing, because you go down to Lafourche and Terrebonne. They can't even get a levy system because the Corps of Engineers will not authorize this project because of a cost-benefit ratio. They go out and issue taxes themselves to get it. And then they have to go through a permitting process. And if it wasn't for the oil companies that would stand up and help them, give them land and give them mitigation, they wouldn't have anything.
Let's make this clear. Since 1980, any permit that moves something in the marsh or those wetlands must be mitigated. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that has been occurring since 1980?
If you say so, yes, sir. I mean, I don't know for a fact, but I'm sure.
You say that because there have been a whole litany of permits that have been required in this country going back to 1930. I only say that so that everyone is aware of that prior to 1980, the U.S. government, the state government, all they worried about was discharge. They didn't worry about anything else. And repairing this marsh, this land, actually began in 1980.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And look, I don't want to interrupt you again, but I do want to tell everyone sitting here, and I want to tell you, if you can give us your comments as quickly as possible.
Yes,
I have been informed by the staff that there's another meeting here at 1:30. Now, I'm not going to adjourn this meeting until I've heard from everybody. I'm going to make y'all clear that, but ask you to be respectful of time.
I will. Give me 2 minutes, sir, and I'll finish for you. Anyway, other levy districts in our association is being directly affected by this lawsuit. Directly, because the oil industry does provide help to these people, provide land, provide funding. They built a $14 million pump station that nobody wanted to build to protect St. Charles Parish. And in the paper, it stated that there was communication cooperation. I found out, and our board found out, when it was in the newspaper. That's when we found out. And then, after our precedent meeting on Friday, on the way back from the meeting, we get an email from John Barry wanting to come in front of our board to explain the lawsuit. Well, that's a day late, dollar short. In 2000, when we created this CPRA, it was created for one purpose, and this is what I'll leave y'all with. One voice. CPRA was the voice. We were supposed to do our responsibility of flood protection and hurricane protection. I've asked on numerous occasions, what do you want us to do for coastal restoration? I was told many times, guys, do the best job you possibly can for flood protection. Do the best y'all can maintaining them, holding the Corps accountable. CPRA will worry about coastal restoration, and we'll all get through this together. We wouldn't go out as a rogue organization to do anything else. That's what we've been told. That's what other levy districts have been told. And the shameful thing of all this is the coastal levy districts are the ones going to be affected by this lawsuit, that Slfpa-East has a very small portion of coastline that they're going to protect. So if they end up with $100 million, the one's going to take care of the stuff right there in St. Bernard. What happens to Lafourche? What happens to Terrebonne? How are you going to get the money from Slfpa-East to pay for that? Maintenance. We collect that revenue. We collect taxes, a millage to do our operation and maintenance. We are in negotiations and very close to entering into an agreement with CPRA for operation and maintenance of the flood protection system on Slfpa West. We're not suing the oil companies. It's through Garrett and M's leadership that we're getting there. And the parishes are coming on board. I can't tell you how many meetings myself and Representative Leopold have had, because part of his district is where we have our levee maintenance and how progress we're making there. But for one authority to have a very small piece of coastline, when if you look at the map, all these other levee districts are south of the river, has all the land loss. None of us are following. As a matter of fact, we're doing the opposite. In our resolution ALBL, all 23 levee districts completely opposed this bill. That is precedent. And the only thing I can ask for y'all when we get into session, please, please do not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I appreciate your comments. We thank you, Mr. Graves. We thank you. Now, I have 4 cards here. I'll take them in the order of which I got them. I have to tell you that Commissioner Foster Campbell was here early this morning. Foster, you want to come on up? For those of you who don't know, Foster was in the Senate